the greenhouse gas emission inventories and our goals of reduction show up in every other decision that we make. It's all so interrelated that it's impossible to sort of pull it apart at this point.
That's Molly Sheppard, Vice President of Winery Strategies at Spottswoode Estate Vineyard and Winery in Napa Valley, a place where carbon accounting data directly drives production decisions. In this conversation, Molly walks us through how Spottswoode used their GHG inventory to identify glass as their single biggest emissions hotspot, then cut bottle weight to reduce packaging emissions by 34%. We also get into what it actually looks like to run a Scopes 1 through 3 inventory at a 20-person winery, how Molly manages to do that without a dedicated sustainability team, and why her best advice for Scope 3 is the classic, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I'm Aaron Stainthorpe, and this is the Carbon Management and Accounting Podcast. If you have questions, comments, or a guest suggestion, you can reach me at podcast@northstar.com. This podcast is brought to you by Northstar Carbon and Impact, the carbon and sustainability management platform built by sustainability professionals for sustainability professionals. Northstar helps companies simplify GHG accounting, improve data quality, and stay audit ready across Scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions so teams can spend less time reporting and more time driving real impact. Here's my conversation with Molly Sheppard. Molly, thanks so much for joining me today. To start, can you tell us about your role at Spottswoode and how you sit at the intersection of winemaking and sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Aaron. My role has evolved quite a lot actually at Spottswoode. My title as it stands right now is Vice President of Winery Strategies. So I am sort of, I guess, in an overarching position across production, winemaking, vineyard, and then also the business administration side, as well as hospitality, direct sales, and sustainability as well. So kind of being able to have some fingers in all sorts of pies. My background is on the winemaking side. So I studied viticulture and enology in Australia, came out to Spottswoode in 2018 as a harvest intern and never left. I've had a kind of hybrid position here at Spottswoode since I've been here, having been the assistant winemaker and environmental manager for years. Started with me putting my hand up to do this whole GHG inventory thing, which I had no idea what I was volunteering for back in 2019. Kind of as a passion project, because I've always been really deeply committed to kind of environmental activism.
I think you have a dream job in many respects, but one thing that I think is particularly unique, many times people that are leading sustainability are not in a leadership role, or they don't really have the same support from ownership or, from the head of the company. How does sustainability show up in your day-to-day work? And can you talk about when you're making day-to-day decisions, how does carbon accounting show up as a factor that you consider?
Leadership here at Spottswoode has always been deeply committed to this work, whether it's been formally defined as greenhouse gas emission inventories and GHG reduction strategies or not. This is kind of deeply ingrained in what matters to, Beth Novak, who's our president and CEO. She is the second gen owner of Spottswoode, along with some of her siblings. To say that she's deeply committed to environmental initiatives is sort of an understatement, honestly. She has publicly shamed people for using single-use plastic water bottles here at the winery and things like that. And I think she has built a team over the years that also includes Aaron Weinkoff, who's our winemaker and vineyard manager, who just deeply believe in the work from a big picture perspective, not just as it pertains to greenhouse gas emissions even, but big picture of making some of the best wines in the world, but also that we want to do it in a way that is mindful and as respectful to the environment and to our stakeholders as possible. Saying goes, you stand on people's shoulders, right? It's where we are now and what we've been able to achieve and what I've been able to help kind of add to in the last 5 years all comes from decades of care and work and of commitment to, doing the best work that we can. And having said all that, the greenhouse gas inventory piece and the reduction goals that we have, they show up every day, as we know. Every single decision that you make has an impact. We're a for-profit business that makes and sells a product. Like, we're always going to have a footprint, right? It shows up in ways that are subtle because even, I think for us, like we started the greenhouse gas inventory sort of journey back in 2018, 2019, where a lot of this DNA had already been set that we deeply care about these things and we just do it because it's the right thing to do. And I'm doing bunny ears when I say that. We weren't quantifying that at that time. We've always cared deeply about energy efficiency and water efficiency in the winery because it's quote unquote, the right thing to do. And now it's sort of a piece that we can also quantify and make goals around, which is really exciting. Packaging decisions, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point with our glass lightweighting journey that we've had with the estate Cabernet, has been a huge piece of how that's shown up. How we farm, obviously, we're deeply committed to organics. We've been organic since the mid 80s. We've added biodynamics and regenerative organics since then. Do we do that because of our GHG inventory? Like, no, we don't. Is that a huge piece of, what we believe in as far as being an answer to climate change through agriculture is, in sequestration and in regenerative agriculture? Absolutely. So I think they're also intertwined. The greenhouse gas emission inventories and our goals of reduction show up in every other decision that we make. It's all so interrelated that it's impossible to sort of pull it apart.
I completely hear everything you're talking about and do want to really honor the legacy that has been built by so many people at Spottswoode. And I think for people that maybe aren't as familiar with Spottswoode, the quality of the organization is really phenomenal. I did want to ask, thinking about how all of these decisions end up being interrelated, many people that I talk to working on carbon accounting or sustainability, it can be very hard to wrap your head around everything because oftentimes organizations are incredibly complex, quite sprawling. And not to say that Spotswood isn't as complex, but as a smaller organization, it really seems like from our conversations, you have visibility into a lot of decision making and can see in a way that probably most leaders can't how different decisions impact multiple different variables at the same time. Given that context, you can share an example where carbon accounting resulted in making a change. And if you can also talk about how, at a smaller organization, if it's fair to characterize Spotswood that way, you really see sustainability and carbon accounting influencing the culture and the decision making process because probably people have more visibility into the whole organization and not just individual silos.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of friends that I admire deeply in this space that work at much larger organizations or corporations than we do. And I think it's fair to characterize Spotswood as small. We have 20 employees total across the company. We all understand what we do each day. And I think that piece does kind of help with that, overarching kind of holistic perspective on every aspect of the business that contributes to the emissions, whether it's the farming or the office, the tasting room, the winery facility, all of those pieces. I think that a really tangible example of changes that we've made truly because of like our inventory process was our glass lightweighting journey that we started. We were brand new to the world of greenhouse gas inventories and carbon accounting, right? And it is a really overwhelming and intimidating space to walk into when you've not done anything like that before. So we did outsource for the first couple of years, just as we were sort of getting our feet, under us as far as that journey was concerned. But it became super apparent that a really large proportion of our emissions were coming from glass and from packaging. Which I know is quite common for a lot of wineries. But I think that's the other piece that's really interesting to this conversation for the nerds around the GHG accounting piece is the scale of the business really does change what drives more of your emissions, right? Because we've only got 37 acres of vineyard, so our tractor emissions are really low. We barely use them. We graze our sheep anyway. But the glass was glaringly obvious, and I think that's what's so cool about doing inventories. It's the classic you can't manage what you don't measure that everybody says, but it's true. And they start to show you what the low hanging fruit is of like, oh, wow, that's really obvious. Like on paper, how much of our emissions are coming from the glass that we're using. And what can we do about that? Really easily, we can start to reduce the weight of these bottles. And do we really care about having super heavy bottles? And honestly, it starts to open up really bigger questions around who do we want to be in the world? You can have a 500-gram bottle with a Cabernet that's at $285, and it doesn't mean that the wine isn't good, And there are these pieces of these consumer perception issues that a lot of wineries are worried about, and quite rightly. And it's fair to be concerned about what, if there's going to be any ripple effects of reducing your glass weight. And I think we felt really passionately about being a leader in that space and of setting the precedent that you can be working towards making the best wines in the world and not have heavy bottles. So we moved from a 700 and I think the official specs was 798, but 790 gram roughly bottle that our estate Cabernet was in 2019 and for years prior to that, to by the time we got to 2022 vintage, so just over 4 vintages, we're at 495 grams. So it's a really significant reduction.
I did want to clarify for people that are not in the wine space and more in the carbon accounting space, the glass emissions that falls under scope 3, and that is a major hotspot for many wineries. But the level of reduction that you're talking about that Spottswoode achieved is really quite remarkable. One thing that typically has come up in my experience, both internally and then externally with your customers, with your wine club members, there is a culture that heavier glass equals higher quality wine. And so there's clear science that we can see from doing carbon accounting about the emissions, but it does feel at a cultural level, some of these changes are not technically hard, but it is actually having those conversations internally and externally. And so I just wanted to ask, did that feel like a pain point? I mean, you mentioned that Spottswoode had really high, engagement with your current wine club members, really has this legacy, this reputation. But I did just want to ask, some of that actually feels like the challenge is not technical there. It's cultural, it's relational, it's making sure that you're not damaging this legacy that's been built by this perception that heavy glass equals higher quality.
There's a really interesting study that got released a couple years ago. It was a study of consumer preference on bottle weight. Consumers had a preference and a significant preference for the heavier bottle in the study. However, when you look at the methodologies there, the heavy bottle was 480 grams versus 350 versus 300 or something, and it was done in Europe because from an international perspective, there's maybe a slightly different skew or thought process around the quality to weight ratio. But I think certainly here in the US, it's real. And people's concerns are valid, and it can be a pain point. And just because you're lightweighting doesn't mean you're compromising on the look or the quality of the glass or what the mold looks like. The amount of time we spent looking at all the molds that were possible within the goal range for weight that we wanted to get to, and the amount we, agonized over, does it have taper? Like, is the shoulder okay? Like this and that, like, what's the punt feel like? How does it feel? Like all of those pieces, you don't have to compromise on the quality of the experience and the aesthetics of your packaging just to get to a lightweight place. Particularly now, I think there's so many producers of glass in the, luxury wine space that are producing really beautiful bottles lighter than they've ever been because the demand is there. So I think we're in a place now where we can hopefully have the best of both worlds. I didn't even mention like the downstream obviously effects. Obviously, we're saving emissions on the glass packaging production side, but then for our actual like shipment piece of shipping our wine and our product transport section of our greenhouse gas emissions for scope 3, and then the post consumer waste piece, because the US still has a lot of work to do from a recycling habit perspective, and also the facilities that are available that actually can recycle glass. And then we did use it as an opportunity to connect with our customers. Like, hey, you'll notice that the wine is lighter. Like, this is why. These are the things that we care about. And I think more and more now in the industry, not just in the wine industry, I think just in the world too, like being able to communicate with people about the things that you care about and your why behind some things that maybe would feel like an odd choice, or maybe there would be a customer that would have a different perspective, but because they received a little card in their shipment with like a sort of, hey, like we're connecting with you, this is why it matters to us, you'll notice that it's different. And it started a lot of really great conversation.
Well, that is a great story. I did want to take this opportunity to zoom out and ask about your participation and leadership in International Wineries for Climate Action. As part of that, for people that are not familiar, that's a global consortium of wineries that are taking climate action seriously. And Spotswood, as part of their participation, commits to doing an annual third-party verified greenhouse gas inventory covering scopes 1 through 3. Because we've already talked about being a smaller organization, I wanted to ask if you could talk through following those same rigorous standards that a lot of larger wineries are following and large companies around the world. What does that look like at Spotswood's scale? So, what tools are you using? And also, given the fact that you have a smaller team, oftentimes putting together GHG inventories can be very time consuming. And so, I wanted to ask, how do you balance all of that about having this big impact and really operating with the same standards and level of rigor that large companies do, and as part of International Wineers for Climate Action, really this leading international organization, but with uh, a smaller team and a lot of other hats that you're wearing at the same time.
I do think that, like anything, the more you do something, the more streamlined the processes become, the more familiar you are with the processes. But it's taken years, honestly, for that to feel, and it's still not a low lift. Anything that's worth doing requires effort. I do think that, we do, as members of International Wineries for Climate Action, have access to the calculator, the scopes 1 through 3 GHG calculator, that's really designed for specifically for the wine industry. That is what I use and I really love. If you don't like spreadsheets and you're new, and having something that's far easier and really kind of user friendly and seamless, and a lot of the work on the back end gets done, and you get to just plop in all of your own kind of raw data, and it does a lot of the work for you. I am, funnily enough, kind of a nerd, like the nitty gritty. I like to see the emissions factors. I want to see all the cells. Like, I actually really like that piece of the calculator for IWCA. There's so many resources now, whether it's, a couple of different really great, super talented professionals that are doing it from a consulting perspective, or, joining IWCA, or at least having one of those like sort of onboarding calls with them to get a good sense. Like, that team is so helpful. Folks like North Star Carbon, who are wildly helpful too and just so good at what they do. I use our international, the IWCA GHG calculator. I have like an old school Google Doc that I've had now for the last 8 years, basically, that has each year. I have each of, the emissions kind of areas, scope 1, 2, and 3. And then within scope 1, 2, and 3, all the things that we track within those pieces. I'm not tracking that every month. I'm not like looking every month about how much propane and diesel we've used for the month. I don't have time for that. But at the end of every year, I'll ask our accounting director, hey, can you send me all of the invoices? And I know who our vendors are. I think that's the piece that makes it easier. And when it's small, you're a small business, you do know these pieces of like, okay, like I know who we buy all these things from. I'm gonna, I'm going to ask for all of the invoices. I'm going to spend a couple days going through it all and plugging it in. Is that the most efficient way? I'm not quite sure. But realistically, to your point, when you've got a small team, and we don't have one dedicated sustainability officer, that is me, and doing a few other things as well. So I don't have the time necessarily to do the tracking month to month that I would like to. But I think it's setting up some of those automated systems of having certain things sent through to you. It's also utilizing a team, like finding a few people that are passionate about it within your team, whether it's small or large. Scope 3 is the biggest one that is, the most time consuming. And a lot of that is engaging with your supply chain and finding all your invoices and kind of understanding. Honestly, the shipments piece is almost the worst. We're wanting to know and quantify the miles and the weight per package of every single product that we sell and ship. And I think having a team of people that are happy to help you with it is huge, whether you're small or whether you're large.
You did reference scope 3, and already in this conversation we talked about packaging, and we even talked about how packaging can impact distribution. And right now you were referencing, distribution, and really probably getting a handle on that data is a challenge in and of itself. I did want to ask, do you have any advice for people on scope 3? I think the one challenge that a lot of people have, there's both getting the data, which can be actually a large challenge, especially when it requires getting things from your supply chain that might not be normal data sets that they provide. And then there's trying to take action on scope 3 because a lot of that is outside of your direct control. So I was just curious if you had anything in particular you wanted to add about scope 3 outside of the packaging we've already discussed.
Scope 3 is the beast of the project, right? It's our largest area of our footprint. it's our area for opportunity. And I guess the thing that I would say to people, is that classic adage, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because it's not going to be perfect. There is a lot of the pieces that are outside of your control as to like what you can source. And I think that the reality in a business case is that the perfect or best emission decision might not be an option. And also, even though we are on a continuous evolution. Like, this isn't a perfect system at this point. It's still, as much as we say accounting, it's modeling really in a lot of ways. Like, I'm not quantifying every single emissions factor here specifically for us at Spotswood, right? I think the advice for the scope 3 piece that I would give is I see people trying to make sure that it's perfect and that they know every single tiny little piece of nuance of within the scope 3 umbrella. I would say don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, good enough is good enough, particularly to start with. You can keep growing, your bandwidth or your ability to quantify certain things. Like, things evolve all the time. There are pieces that I have included through IWCA calculator under scope 3 that weren't part of our original emission inventories, right? They weren't even on the calculator at that point. And that's okay. Obviously, you want to see reductions in your emissions, but it's not about being perfect. And it's not about gamifying the process to be perfect or to get the results that you want. I think my background in labs helps me with that too. Like, the numbers are the numbers. Like, there's no point trying to manipulate them or to change them in any way to get a certain outcome. And so I think so much of that from a scope 3 perspective is engaging with your supply chain. There are a lot of people, I would say, that probably don't know their vendors, maybe haven't asked questions around like, hey, have you guys got a sustainability journey? Like, are you doing any work to quantify any of your emissions? Like, do you know what your emissions factor is for your product? Or, a few of those pieces. And oftentimes the answer might be no, we don't know yet. But there is that sort of ability to start conversation. And the more that everybody within, your scope 3 is somebody's scope 1, right? Is that classic piece. So, like, the more that you can engage with your supply chain to say, like, hey, like, this piece is really important to us. We would love to have, some emissions information about your product. And if enough people ask them that, they want to supply what their customers want, right? And then you start to get barrel producers that are starting to quantify their emissions of their barrels. And, the more that people are doing the work of quantifying their emissions within their own business, the easier the scope 3 piece gets. It will start to be easy at some point where you have really, I'm going to buy this barrel and you get specs, or like glass or yeast or whatever it is that you're buying from a winery perspective. Like, how much it is, how much it weighs, what's in it, what the ingredients are. And at some point, I would hope that we get to a place where we know what the emissions are for that product, right? And you can just start to be able to plug those things in. And that's the future that I'm imagining, is that none of this is as hard as it is now. And I think that's what's a really cool opportunity about being part of something that is, we're in the pioneering phase still of doing this work.
I think that's a very helpful perspective, and it really feels like we are building the path so that I share your hope that things will continue to get easier as we move forward and we all work on this collectively. I wanted to switch gears again, and here, scope 3, we're talking really, the boundaries of what Spotswood is doing. But if we now focus specifically in the vineyard, there's a lot that you're doing within the vineyard. So first, farming organically, biodynamic, and now regenerative organic certification. Spotswood is doing a tremendous amount. But I did want to ask, since this is a podcast on carbon accounting, how do you see those decisions in the vineyards, which are a huge part of what makes Spotswood wine kind of have the reputation that it does? How do you see those vineyard decisions impacting on carbon accounting? And do you see more evolution happening there in the future?
We are deeply passionate and committed to the regenerative organic sort of movement, I would say. And it's something that feels really inspiring for us, mostly because of the impact that regenerative farming can make on a larger scale for climate action and climate change, as we know. And when we speak about the carbon inventory process, obviously there's a multiple buckets of climate action through any type of business. It's you're reducing, and particularly I should say business within the wine sector, because we have a natural carbon sink that we're tied to in a way that so many businesses don't have the luxury of having a carbon sink attached to their business, and have to think more about offsets or what their other options are. Where for us, the things that are important to us just from a farming perspective, building living soils, looking after biodiversity. It's a remembering of how humans have been in relationship and in companionship with the land for thousands of years before the agricultural revolution and before more of this commodification of agriculture that we've seen in the last 100 years. So I think there's so much of this sort of remembering of coming back to the land as people that are, have always been in communion with it. First Nations people have been living this way for a very, very long time. Obviously you're wanting to work on greenhouse gas reduction. We've got our long-term plans for all of those pieces, but that's only one piece of the puzzle from a climate action perspective. Like we also have to help solve, and we're able to help solve climate, carbon drawdown and that sequestration piece, which obviously, as we know, regenerative farming is getting so much attention for at the moment, as it should, particularly regenerative organic farming. We've really moved to pretty much fully no-till through our regenerative organic certification, which, as we know and we can assume, deeply impacts a lot of the mobile fuel pieces of our inventory. So we're using way less diesel, and reducing our sort of dependency on fossil fuels is a big piece of the benefits of moving into even more so farming that way, because we really are, wanting to be 100%, and we're not quite there yet. Again, this is like an evolution and a goal, but we would like to be at a place where we're 100% grazed by livestock. And I know there's been some updates from the GHG protocol actually just this year as far as sequestration rates and those pieces are concerned. I don't think we have at the moment gotten to a place where we can quantify our sequestration to be like sure that it's, at a place where we can have it into an audited greenhouse gas inventory and have it subtracted from our overall emissions. I would love to get to that place. Like that's kind of in my mind, what does carbon neutral look like for us? That would be the dream for us, and to be able to quantify that and to be able to have it actually kind of seen and recognized in an audit would be a direction that I would love to be able to go. I think we're getting there for sure. Obviously, there's just so much research that kind of still needs to happen. And then, but as we know, the technology is there and the research is happening, and we're so close to getting to that place where wineries like us with not much bandwidth will be able to start being able to, quantify sequestration and kind of understand really what's happening.
I do love the time dimensions that you put out there, just thinking about how humans have related to the landscape and agriculture historically, all the work that you're doing now, particularly on regenerative organic, and also starting to think about what the future could entail if sequestration guidance, measurement, and tools were more developed. But it feels like you have a clear sense of where you would like Spottswoode to go in the future. And I think that's really exciting. I wanted to ask about the business case for climate leadership. And some of this, you mentioned this legacy that's been built, the work that you've done, the support from the family. And I just wanted to ask, thinking about solar zero waste certification, carbon accounting, many other certifications, can you help me get a better sense or help tell our listeners how you see that impacting the business case for Spotswood being a for-profit company and wanting to be sustainable and lasting for hopefully generations to come?
There's no point truly being so dedicated to environmental initiatives that you sacrifice the health of your business and you're out of business in 5 years, right? That's, it sort of defeats the purpose. So I do think that there is that need for long-term strategy and long-term thinking. A lot of these certifications and these practices for us personally, I think there's a business case for them. It's in the unsexy sort of bottom line perspective, the amount of money you save from maximizing efficiencies on your operations, which does reduce greenhouse gases and reduces your emissions, but also saves you money. Maybe you're doing it because you want to, on paper, you want to reduce your emissions, but then you've got these kickback effects that you're like, oh, actually, I'm saving money on energy. Oh, funnily enough, we replaced the cooling system because that refrigerant was really high emissions and awful. And now we've finally replaced the cooling system that we needed to, and we're not spending any money on topping it up, and we're not spending money on maintenance and all of these small things. I think that maybe the reason you made that decision was because of a certification or a requirement as a standard, whether that's B Corporation is another one, and Napa Green as well. But sometimes you might make those choices because you feel like you need to, or it's part of the certification, or it's part of the process to get to where you want to go. And you see all these benefits behind the scenes, and a lot of it is cost savings. Honestly, I do think, particularly in the wine world, moving into this next generation of millennials and Gen Zs who are like having a larger piece of the pie of the demographic of consumer, whether it's shoes, whether it's clothes, whether it's makeup, whether it's wine, whether it's a food, whatever. People are more interested in these next generations as to what's going on behind the scenes, how people are doing business, what's in these products that they're either consuming or wearing, what's behind it, who's behind it, where does it come from, all of these pieces that I think people now more than ever want that transparency and that assurance that they're making a good choice. And that their hard-earned money is going towards something that they support. And I do think there is, not everyone makes choices that way, but I think there's more people now making choices that way than ever. So I do think it's also a part of meeting consumer demand, and ensuring long-term sort of loyalty from a consumer perspective. I definitely feel like people feel aligned with what we're doing. And I think that now more than ever, people want to be a part of something they believe in through the products that they purchase or through the life that they live, right? And I do think less so for demographics, like boomers, for example, are purchasing our wines because of the quality and the notoriety and the brand equity and all of those pieces. But I do think we're seeing more people coming in from millennial and Gen Z generations that want to support producers and products that they believe in.
The work that you are doing at Spottswoode is really exceptional. A lot to unpack there, but just given time, I'm going to move us into the implementation minute and ask you a few more rapid fire questions. Based on this conversation, if you can just imagine it's Monday morning, a sustainability professional or winemaker just finished this episode, driving to work. What's one thing you think they should do when they get to their desk, something that maybe takes 30 minutes that would be your advice for them based on our conversation today?
I would go on to the IWCA website. I really would. I would jump on and have a look. There are a lot of resources there. There's a really easy contact us button. It's not about being a member. It's also just about connecting with a great team of people that can offer support and guidance. But there's a lot of really great free resources that I feel like people would really benefit from, like just a 20-minute scroll. I think it's a really great first step.
What's one resource you'd recommend? I don't know if there's another resource in addition to the IWCA website, which I agree has great content.
Yeah, there is. I'm a big book person. I think my favorite thing about certain podcasts is like book recommendations. I have this dream of starting like I don't know, like a email like kind of chain on books to read. And this is not greenhouse gas inventory or carbon accounting specific, but it is climate action specific and more sort of philosophical. And I found it really inspiring as a read. And it's The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles C. Mann. It sort of unpacks two different scientists who were studying together on the same farm in the 40s in Mexico, that were trying to solve the same problem of world hunger, right? One of them went off and started the Green Revolution and GMO seeds and things like that. And the other really kind of founded the new wave of the ecological movement. And both of them were trying to do the same thing. And it's this exploration of innovation versus traditional wisdom and the marrying of the two, and where each has a place in how we can approach trying to solve some of the really big problems that we're all facing right now as a planet and as a people. And it's a great book.
Thank you. Before we wrap, a quick thank you to North Star Carbon and Impact for supporting this podcast. If you're looking for an easier, more transparent way to manage carbon and ESG data and prepare for audits, reporting, and decarbonization planning, visit northstarcarbon.com to learn more or request a demo. Molly, as we wrap up this episode, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about Spottswoode's environmental work?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram. Spottswoode Winery is on Instagram. Our website, obviously, spottswoode.com. I have a personal Instagram, which is mkshep, if you ever want to, personally connect with me. Also via email as well, which I'm happy to give to you. And you can pop that in the show notes if anyone has any questions or wants to get started. So happy to share my direct contact information with folks that are listening.
Well, Molly, thank you so much. I also want to thank all of our listeners today for joining us. If this episode was valuable to you, please share your biggest takeaway on LinkedIn and tag us so we can continue the conversation. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, Aaron.